Hello and welcome to Tech Deals. Game performance on the i3-8350K and the GTX 1050 Ti overclocked to 4.8 gigahertz. This is an $800 system build that I've done previous videos on. Link in the video description below to the full playlist. Number 1 was the parts overview, the parts I chose and why. Number 2 was a detailed look at that chip, which is a controversial choice. Many of you were like, oh man, come on, buy an i5, buy an i7, buy a Ryzen 5, buy a Ryzen 7. Nobody should buy that chip. Well, thank you for your advice. You're correct much of the time, except now where you're wrong. In this video, I'm going to show you 5 games benchmarked: World of Tanks, World of Warships, Overwatch, League of Legends, and Star Wars: The Old Republic. I promise you, this chip is faster than anything AMD makes in those 5 games, bar none. Frame rate, performance, launch time, everything. There is nothing that a Ryzen 7 2700X will do for those 5 games that this chip won't do faster at 4.8 gigahertz. It is a corner case, and I understand, and let's not rehash it because I did discuss it in part 1 and part 2 extensively, but if those are the kind of games you play, if you don't care about playing Far Cry 5, if you don't care about playing Assassin's Creed Origin or Assassin's Creed Odyssey, look, I'm rehashing it again, what can I say, then this thing is wonderful. If you have the money, yes, go get an i5-8600K, go get an i7-8700K, overclock it to 4.8 or 5 gigahertz. Yeah, you'll be more future-proofed, you'll be able to do more stuff with it. By all means, if you've got the money, buy more. Buy more, and it just makes your computer last longer. But as much as I love Ryzen, and I really, really love Ryzen, Ryzen 7 1700 and 2700 are huge values for the money. They are slower per core and per thread than this is, considerably so. The average frame rates here are impressive, even with a GTX 1050 Ti. Now, if you look inside the machine, you'll notice that we have a GTX 1070 Ti. That's the Galaxy card that I previously reviewed. There's no benchmark results from that in here, but I'm curious as to your feedback. Do you want to see a part 5 to this video series with these same 5 games benchmarked and compared between a 1050 Ti and a 1070 Ti? Would any of you ever buy this chip and that card? I'm of the mindset that you wouldn't. What you would do is buy an i5-8600K, if not an i7-8700K, to pair it with that. That's an expensive graphics card, and another $60, $70, depending upon the price at the time you watch this video, would at least get you 50% more cores and threads. However, it's in there because I'm thinking about it. Your comments and your reaction to this video will determine whether or not I do that. But all the benchmarks you're about to see were done with this EVGA card right here. When I first put the system together, it was going to have a Galaxy 1050 Ti. Lo and behold, the 1050 Ti Galaxy sent me doesn't work. It just will not boot. Absolutely no video out whatsoever. And I can't tell you why. Hopefully they will send me another one, but, well, considering the 20 series is coming, well, actually it's launched, but the 2050 hasn't launched yet, but it'll be coming soon enough. Maybe they will, maybe they won't, but I swapped this in and got the benchmarks you're about to see. The graphics card was not overclocked, and this particular card has a quirk. The fan RPM in terms of RPM shows 0. That's because this doesn't output the fan RPM. The percentage does. So the fan was turning. Don't think the fan wasn't turning. But what's more interesting is the graphics card usage, which wasn't 100% a lot of the time. Even at 4.8 gigahertz, that CPU was still a bottleneck. And so now I've sat here and talked long enough, and many of you are like, when are you getting to the bloody benchmarks already? I understand. The benchmarks are going to take 2 forms. I have a chart, of course, 0.1% low, 1% low, and then average frame rate. I'm not bothering with max because those are through the roof, quite frankly, especially on League of Legends. And then I'm going to show you snippets of live gameplay. Depending upon your interest, I might upload the entire game recordings over to Floatplane, linked down in the description below, as sort of a Floatplane bonus, but there will be snippets of the actual live gameplay here because I think it is so important to watch the actual frame delivery and watch the frame rate in live gameplay and not just look at charts. If you wanted to look at charts, you'd go to a website. You could watch a 2-minute video, see a chart, but if you don't really understand the chart or what it represents, or if you don't see how whether the game is smooth or not, the chart may lie to you. Charts can be deceptive because they don't tell the whole story of smoothness in addition to average and 1% low frame rates. You'd think 1% low would mean, well, if it's got a good 1% low, you're fine. Maybe. How smooth is the frame pacing? We're about to show you. So enough talk. We're going to start off with the live gameplay, and then the charts will be at the end of the video to provide you a motivation to watch this to the end of the video. If you really get sick of my commentary and don't want to see the gameplay, scroll forward to about 80% of the video on YouTube and you'll find the benchmark charts there. But I encourage you to watch the live gameplay because I think in many regards, it's more informative than just a chart is. The first game we're looking at is League of Legends. Of course this plays great. This game would play on a potato. It'll play on integrated graphics, but if you want hundreds of frames per second, you've got them. The first thing I want to show you is MSI Afterburner's real-time performance numbers in the upper left-hand corner of the screen. The very first percentage on the very first line is the usage of the graphics card. We are using less than 40% of the graphics performance of the GTX 1050 Ti. We are completely CPU bottlenecked. Wait a minute, you say, how's that possible? On the third line, it looks like the CPU is only 50% utilized. You're correct. League of Legends only uses 2 cores. It doesn't even use the 4. So we are actually CPU bottlenecked rather than GPU bottlenecked, and what we really want would be like a 2-core 5.5 or 6 gigahertz chip if it existed. It really doesn't, but that would be ideal. So a GTX 1050 would be fine. A GT 1030 would be fine. A previous generation GTX 750 Ti would also be fine. Look at our VRAM use. We're playing at high detail. We're using half a gig of RAM. This game's absolutely fine. I mentioned that the RPM of the graphics card shows 0 RPM. Look at the number just before it, the 30%. That is the percentage fan speed of the card. It's completely silent. I'm just explaining why. It's a quirk of the EVGA 1050s. The 1016 up doesn't have this problem. And then, of course, you can see the clock speed of the card is at 1800 megahertz. Look at the clock speed of the CPU, 4.5 gigahertz. Hang on a second. Didn't I say it was 4.8 gigahertz? Well, yes, but if you watch part 3 of this video series, the overclocking video, I talked about the fact that it was 4.8. In fact, it just touched 4.8 there briefly, with a -3 AVX offset. This is an important point. When the FPU or AVX instructions are engaged, the CPU comes down 300 megahertz. If you don't do this, it's not likely to be stable. AVX is more complicated. Using the FPU is more challenging than just the CPU integer units, so that's why it's down here. You'll see it at 4.8 in the others, and you'll see it occasionally jump to 4.8 here, but for whatever reason, League of Legends is stressing the FPU enough that it's triggering the AVX offset. Check this out right here. They tried so hard to get me, but I did a pretty good job of getting these guys and not dying. I'm just sitting here kiting them. Oh, come back here. I'm going to kill you, dude. No. Oh, shoot. He got away from me. In any case, take a look at the CPU temp. Even though the CPU is heavily utilized, we're only at about 60 degrees C, which if you watch, I'm still trying to get those guys, which if you watch the overclocking video at 4.8 gigahertz, we were at like 70 plus C. But we were using all 4 cores in that. Here we're only using 2, which is why the temp is so much lower. And then you can see the power consumption. We're using, what, 31 watts of power? With only 2 cores at 4.5 gigahertz, the power consumption is next to nothing. Main system RAM, okay, I put 16 gigs in here because I put 16 gigs in every system. We're using less than 4. 8 gigs would be absolutely plenty with this particular setup. And here you can see the ridiculous frame rate as we're running back. Notice the low is very low. You can see I'm using MSI Afterburner for the benchmarking. I am no longer using Fraps. Fraps has been retired. We're using the built-in benchmarking of MSI Afterburner. This is a much better solution. Now, this particular voiceover and spiel for League of Legends has been much longer than the next 4 will be, but that's because I was explaining all the numbers. I'll cover them briefly as we look at each section. But of course, this thing plays wonderfully, as you can see. Moving on to Rocket League. Now, I said earlier in this video it was just a complete mental blank on my part that we were doing World of Warships. Nope, I skipped World of Warships this time. There is plenty of Warships content on my channel. I think many of you are sick of seeing that game, so I did something different. Rocket League. I had simply forgotten I had done this because I recorded these benchmarks like 2 weeks before this voiceover. Sorry about that. In any case, take a look at the real-time performance numbers in the upper left-hand corner of the screen. We are not necessarily CPU bottlenecked this time, although we are to a certain point. This game is not exactly known as a multi-core beast. But the graphics card is being fully utilized. We're at 98%, and it's largely going to stay there. This is a situation where a GTX 1060 or 1070 or an RX 580 really would make a difference if you want hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of frames per second. Still, the CPU would limit us at a certain point, and we are sort of in a nice balance here between graphics card and CPU bottlenecking. There's always a bottleneck. I get asked all the time, will this CPU bottleneck that graphics card? Well, one of them will. Something's always limiting performance. Maybe it's the game engine, maybe it's your monitor, maybe it's the CPU, maybe it's the graphics card, but something limits performance. But we're largely using 2 cores here, and unlike League of Legends, you'll notice that it pretty much sticks to 4.8 gigahertz most of the time. A couple of times it dips down, but most of the time it's at 4.8, and the temps are pretty reasonable. It's currently at 68, well it dropped down to 59, there's 67, 63. It's bouncing around. We are using more power than League of Legends did. The clock speed's higher, and the CPU usage does jump up a little bit more. We're about 36 watts. Still, I mean, this is absolutely nothing. To be completely blunt, temps and power consumption are very reasonable. Our 120mm liquid cooler is fine. Honestly, a Hyper 212 Evo or something similar, a 4 or a 6 heat pipe direct contact cooler from any reasonable manufacturer would be enough. You don't have to use a liquid cooler. I just did because I had it. It's really quite remarkable, all things considered. The main system RAM is very similar to League of Legends, under 4 gigabytes. This game would play just fine on 8. You don't need 16 gigs of RAM. Technically, it would run in 4, as would League. I wouldn't recommend it. I mean, you will get some stutters. Certainly, if you're going with an overclocked system, go ahead and at least get 8. But if budgets are tight, you can certainly do 8 with these 2 games, no problem. VRAM's not an issue. We're under 1 gigabyte. Again, a GTX 750 Ti would be fine, although the frame rate would be slower. A GT 1030 would be fine, but again, the frame rate would be roughly half what it is here. Or an older GTX 960, for example, with 2 gigs of VRAM would also be just fine. Let me know in the comments below whether or not you really want to see a GTX 1060 or 1070 or gasp 1070 Ti with this game. I think it's overkill, but let me know what you think. Next up, we have World of Tanks. Again, 1080p high detail, and if you look in the upper left-hand corner, we finally have a game that exceeds 2 gigabytes of VRAM. So in theory, the 2 gigabyte GTX 1050 or some other card with only 2 gigs of VRAM would technically not have enough. Truth be told, when you're within 10%, it usually doesn't matter. Games will swap the textures out as necessary, so it's not a huge deal. And you could, of course, always turn the textures down to medium while leaving everything else at high, and you would fit just fine. But I just wanted to point it out, since it's the first game I'm showing you that truly and honestly uses 2+ gigs of VRAM. We are fully maxed out on the graphics card. This is a definite case where if you want high detail and high frame rates, that a 3 gigabyte GTX 1060 would be perfect. You don't need the 6 gig card, certainly not for games like this, but the 3 gigabyte card would give you enough VRAM and it would give you extra graphics horsepower to kick that frame rate up a notch. Clock speed is a little bit lower, but it's still over 1700. Again, I've not manually overclocked it. Fan speed's at 37%. Very fine overall. Watch the clock speed of the i3-8350K. It's at 4.8 gigahertz a lot of the time, but a couple of times here and there it drops down to 4.5. Again, it depends upon what the system is doing. Now, this is a completely clean test system with a fresh install of Windows. Nothing else is running in the background, not even Fraps. Just MSI Afterburner and just the game. These games are all being captured externally on an Elgato HD60S capture card plugged. In this particular case, they were plugged into my Ryzen 7 2700X system downstairs, so the computer doesn't even know it's being recorded. I should have mentioned that back at League of Legends, but I'll mention it now. See, this is why you want to watch all the game footage. It gets you lots of useful information, because inevitably somebody down in the comments below are going to be like, what would the performance have been like if you weren't capturing the video? Exactly the same. The computer doesn't know it was being captured. Notice that we are using more than 2 cores. At times, we're using all 4. Whenever you go above 75% usage, that's your 4 cores. 50% is 2 cores, 25% is 1 core. Here at the moment, we're largely just using about 3 cores, but it does jump to 4 from time to time. With more graphics performance, it might use a bit more. As I said at the beginning of this video, if you really were going to do a GTX 1070 Ti, I honestly, yes, I would spend the extra money. I would get an i5-8600K. At 4.8 gigahertz, it's not going to make the game faster, but it gives you a bit of a margin, especially games like World of Tanks that are in active development and will only grow over time, and some other things that you play. With a $350 to $400 graphics card, I'd spend the extra $70 and get an i5 6-core chip rather than an i3 4-core chip. But with a 3 gig GTX 1060, this really is all that you need. It depends upon your budget and how much you want to spend. If the extra $70 to $80 is a big deal to you, or whether or not it's you'll go without steak this month. That's entirely up to you. System RAM, 8 gigs of RAM for these games is just fine. As I said, I put 16 in because I put 16 in everything. Notice we're using about 4 gigabytes of main system RAM. 8 would be plenty. 4, okay, technically 4 would work. I would not recommend 4. Everything's maxed. Windows has nothing to swap with. It has nothing to use as a disk cache. But 8 would be swell. Now, this is World of Tanks 1.01. Notice that the frame rate is over 120. You used to have to go and edit the engine config file, but you don't have to do that anymore. They've removed that limitation. So this is the stock game fully patched in September of 2018. And of course, here I'm not fighting the frame rate spectacular, but yeah, overall, this is perfection. If you want high frame rates and great performance, you got it in World of Tanks. That leads us into Overwatch. Overwatch is insanely popular, and yet it really doesn't need more than 4 cores. Truthfully, it would run just fine on a 2-core 4-thread chip. It does jump above 2 from time to time. It most certainly doesn't need more than 4. We are, however, graphics card limited here. Take a look at the real-time performance numbers in the upper left-hand corner, and you're going to see that poor old GTX 1050 Ti pegged to 99% throughout this battle. You're also going to see over 100 frames per second, which isn't bad for 1080p high detail. Want more frame rate? Turn the detail down. With this graphics card, it would give you higher frame rates. Or, of course, you could go with a GTX 1063 gig card, or if you want to go all out crazy, a 1070 Ti would be honestly a bit nuts. VRAM usage, 1.4 gigabytes, a 2 gigabyte card is fine, a 3 gigabyte 1060 is fine if you want a bit more. Main system RAM, this uses more main system RAM than anything else we've really shown you so far, 6 gigabytes. Would it run in 8? Yes, it would run just fine in 8, so long as you have nothing else running in the background, you're not doing anything else. The performance on 8 would be basically identical to what you're seeing here. 4, no way, forget it, absolutely not. But you shouldn't build a system like this with 4 anyway. You can get away with 8, but if you want to live stream Overwatch, or if you, for example, if you have a better graphics card, you could GPU encode it. Even with the CPU, you could live stream just fine. If you want to live stream the game, if you want to run multiple monitors and have a website or YouTube or something else running on another screen, if you have more programs running, 16 gigs is not crazy. It'll probably be a little bit smoother if you have anything else running with 16 gigs, but if you have nothing else in your computer, okay, 8's fine. Clock speed, 4.8 gigahertz. Power consumption, it's a little bit higher here, about 40 watts, or it peaks at 40 watts. Temps are fine as well, 50s, almost 60 degrees Celsius. For a 4.8 gigahertz overclock on a basic 120 millimeter liquid cooler, that's not bad. This leads us to Star Wars: The Old Republic, player versus environment. I'm actually going to show you 2 different benchmarks here on Star Wars: The Old Republic. Player versus environment, open world solo, and player versus player instanced Warzone PvP. It's important because this game performs completely differently depending upon which environment you're in. Now, if you have never seen or heard of Star Wars: The Old Republic, first of all, where have you been? Second of all, do you like Star Wars? Do you like epic Star Wars stories? Play this game. Free to play. All 8 main storylines, start to finish, completely 100% free. And I can honestly tell you from experience, you are not missing anything by not paying money. Don't spend a dime on the story missions. You don't need to. The only thing you need to spend money on in this game is if you want to do endgame content, raids, dungeons, that kind of thing. If you want to get super duper endgame gear, it's not that it's pay to win, but the endgame gear is locked behind the monthly subscription. But the leveling process and all of the story content is not, and you don't need any of it. You really, really don't. There's auto level boosts and level sync and endless free gear from the game. You can play this 100% for free for hundreds and hundreds of hours. It is, in my opinion, bar none, the best value in terms of story entertainment for free in the business. So with that point aside, what you're watching here is story mode stuff. This is Alderaan. I'm a level 70 endgame super character with all the wonderful gear, but I'm level synced down to 34 because this planet is basically a level 34 planet. So all that super gear does you no good here because I'm on Alderaan in the open world. I can still kill these guys easily because I'm still overpowered, but this right here is what you can expect from the story mode. Look at our frame rate. I'm in combat there. Now it does drop, and if you watch the frame rate graph, it's terrible. This game's engine is terrible. It's not the computer's fault. There's nothing you can do about it. This game engine is, I believe at this point, 12 years old. It's the Hero Alpha engine from 2006, and it never has really gotten proper treatment. It's not has nothing to do with the current Hero engine. Blame the BioWare Austin developers for basically picking a terrible MMO engine, but that's neither here nor there. Open world, it's not too bad, even if it's a bit choppy at times. PvP is where it's pretty brutal, but in any case, notice that the VRAM usage is nothing. We're less than a gigabyte, and we are at 1080p high detail. It does go higher than this, but the detail increase doesn't really justify it, in my opinion. It's nice, but, you know, pick your poison. Do you want 60 frames a second at max detail or 100 to 150 frames per second at high detail? Main system RAM usage? Under 5 gigabytes, not an issue. 8 gigs would be enough, but I caution you, there are places in the game where it goes up. I would prefer 16, but it will run in 8. We're running at 4.8 gigahertz. Temps, however, are higher. Notice that the CPU usage at points peaks. This game has been trending upwards in terms of core usage. When it first launched, it was kind of a single core game, briefly dabbling into a second core. It's slowly been changing over time as they've added effects and overlays. The custom overlay that you're looking at here, not the MS Afterburner, but the game itself, they've enhanced the overlays, they've added features. It has increased the load of the game over time, but still, 4 cores, 4 threads is enough for this. It's all about the clock speed. This entire build just screams Star Wars The Old Republic. Several people in the first video said, oh, you made a Star Wars The Old Republic build. Gotcha. Because more than perhaps any other currently running game on the market today, this game just wants all the clock speed you can give it. If you could give this game 7 gigahertz, it would take it and eat it for breakfast. That is not an exaggeration. I have 38 max level characters in this game. I have comfortably over 1,000 hours personally played. So of everything that I've discussed, I can discuss this game with a depth of experience that really very few other current games I could probably match in. I probably have too much time in this game. It is a lot of fun. The story missions are epic. The worlds are open and epic. The end game is not actually the impressive part, in my opinion. Don't rush to end game. Do the side quest. The story is awesome. 250,000 voiced lines. Everything's fully voiced, or most of it is anyway. And that's the launch content. There's probably over 1/3 lines of voice content. This is turning into a Star Wars The Old Republic review, so we're going to, move on from here. But this is fun. I'm a bit soured on the endgame content at the moment. I have my complaints on PvP being unbalanced. The story is epic. That leads us to player versus player Warzone instanced combat. Now here's the challenge of showing you this. The performance of the different PvP war zones varies dramatically. And I want you to watch the frame rate right now very carefully. This is important. First of all, notice that the GTX 1050 Ti, not at 99%. We are CPU limited. We are hard CPU limited. I'm engaging in combat. Watch the frame rate. Yeah, really. It falls apart in these environments. Watch the graphics card usage. The graphics card usage is dropping below 50% at times. The frame rate is dropping down into the 50s. We were in the 140 to 150 frame rate in the Warzone before combat started. This game does not handle 8 versus 8 PvP Warzones well at all. Frankly, it doesn't handle player versus player anywhere very well at all, but it's much easier to show it here than it is to show it out in the open world. It just, no amount of CPU power makes a difference. And it isn't graphics power. Look at the graphics card. The graphics card's low 28%, 35%. The graphics card is bored. It has nothing to do. Wouldn't matter what you put in here. It doesn't make a difference. It's all about the CPU. And we're only using 2 cores here in the war zones. Again, if you could throw a 7 gigahertz, a 10 gigahertz processor, this game would eat it for breakfast. But that doesn't exist, unfortunately. It's a bad game engine and bad programming. It was never meant for player versus player. It was never meant for this. It does really well in the open world solo story content. What I just described to you about the leveling content, the 8 different class stories, 4 on the Republic side, 4 on the Imperial side, the level 1 to 50 leveling, those are awesome. Those are amazing. And those perform great. This doesn't. But if you want to play player versus player, what you need are the fastest 2 cores you can get your hands on, and it's not Ryzen. I love Ryzen. Ryzen's wonderful and amazing and a great value, and 8 cores, 16 threads for $200-ish. Wow! But it means nothing here. And the 3.7-ish gigahertz clock speed that you'll get out of Ryzen will be substantially slower here because it's just going to use 2 of the cores. It's not going to use the 16 threads that just sit around doing nothing. Having said that, what I just showed you is like one of the best case PvP Warzone scenarios. Here's the opposite. This is SWTOR, and this is one of the much, much older PvP Warzones. One of my favorites, personally. I love the doors. It's called SWTOR, but everybody calls it the doors, or at least I do anyway. Our goal is to plant the bomb on the doors. There's 3 sets of doors to get through. Defending team tries to stop you, and there's 2 different rounds. We're in round 2 at the moment. Basically, you take turns defending and attacking. Watch the frame rate. Now, what's useful about this one is I don't die very often. I spend a large amount of time in combat, and so I spend a large amount of time with everybody standing in front of me. This right here is sort of the worst case, and the last one I just showed you is the best case. Because their goal is not to kill me. I mean, they obviously would love to if they can, but trying to kill me is often actually the way you lose the game is defense. Just not dying. Making sure that you always have 2 or 3 people on each of the 2 doors is how you survive this. Yeah, we're at 34 frames per second right now, or we were for a second there. 34 frames per second at 1080p high on a 7-year-old MMO on a 4.8 gigahertz processor. Does that sound dreadful? It is. And BioWare and Electronic Arts, who owns BioWare, should be embarrassed at these numbers. This unfortunately represents the fact that they've ceased real development of the game. The stories are great, the leveling is great, there are elements of the game that are great, but basically they've put no further effort into it at this point. It's in maintenance mode. They are trickling out bits and pieces of content so they can say, hey, look, we have new stuff coming. If you're paying any attention to this game at all, it's deeply in maintenance mode. They're trickling enough to keep what paying subs they have paying and to keep what cash coming in they've got. I'm sure it doesn't cost very much to run the servers. They've done multiple server merges at this point. I think they're down to only 5 servers worldwide at this point. None of this matters if you play the leveling game, if you play this story. You can do that solo. You can do that yourself. This is an unbalanced performance, unmitigated mess. But that's me. You might love it. If you love it, yeah, this is what you can expect. Turning the detail down won't help because you're not graphics card limited. Turning the CPU up would help, but where are you going to go from here? 5 gigahertz? That's not going to make a huge difference. But I show this to you to show you that there are situations, this is just one of them, where clock speed is everything. Well, I think 30 minutes of that is enough, so let's show you some benchmark charts. Average frame rates across the entire benchmark runs, not just what I showed you. There was an hour and a half worth of footage, so I cut an hour out of this. 229 frames per second in League of Legends. Yes, of course, that's crazy high, but the CPU really does make a difference there. The graphics card was not even fully utilized. In Rocket League, we had 166 frames per second. World of Tanks, 144, spot on the money if you have a 144 Hz 1080p monitor. 108 frames per second in Overwatch. A 3 gig GTX 1060 really would make a pretty big difference there. That game was very much GPU bound. Star Wars The Old Republic player versus environment averaged 128 frames per second. Very nice, totally playable, no issues. Player versus player. This 84, please note, is from the first PvP Warzone that I showed you. The second, VoidStar, averaged 53. I'm being generous to the game here, really. But I'm telling you verbally, it was 53 average in VoidStar across that entire battle. It was dreadful because I was in combat the entire time. This 84 is averaging out the 140 when I'm not in combat with the 40 when you are. So I'm being nice, but really it's just dreadful. And this is what the 4.8 or hopefully 5 gigahertz is all about. This next chart is the 1% low. Essentially 1% of the time, this is the low frame rate. Or to flip it on its head, 99% of the time, you'll get this performance or higher. So in League of Legends, 99% of your gameplay will be 155 frames per second or higher. Rocket League will be 127 frames per second or higher 99% of the time. World of Tanks, 84 frames per second. Overwatch, 83. And then as you can see, Star Wars The Old Republic is dreadful. And that's a frame pacing issue. That game engine is just a mess. Don't put too much worry on these because there's nothing you can do about it. 4.8 gigahertz, it's just clock speed. 10 gigahertz would be wonderful. People have asked for these, so I'm including them. These are the 0.1% low. 99.9% of the time, you'll get at least these frame rates. Star Wars The Old Republic is predictably awful. We've discussed that. I don't need to bring it up again. League of Legends is the interesting one. 44 frames per second. Deaths. When your character dies and you beam back to the start, it's just there's a momentary frame in there. There's a couple of places there at the very end that it just happens. There's no place in the normal gameplay that that's remotely an issue. So these are the real numbers that MSI Afterburner recorded, but I wouldn't put too much precedence in that. The Rocket League, World of Tanks, and Overwatch numbers, however, are useful. 86, 66, and 60. Very respectable numbers, all things considered. This is an awesome casual gaming and esports gaming PC in terms of maximum frame rates, maximum per core speed, just not a lot of them. Want more future-proofing? Spend another $70 or $80 and get an i5-8600K. Just keep in mind that Ryzen's awesome. I love Ryzen, but once again, it is not going to have the per-core performance, and the frame rates are going to be lower. Maybe I'll do a video comparing that. Let me know in the comments below just how much you want to see, say, a Ryzen 5 2600 versus this thing with the same graphics card to see just how much of a difference it makes. And that brings us to the end of our video. Just to be absolutely clear, i5-8600K or i7-8700K overclocked to the same 4.8 gigahertz would give you exactly the same performance numbers here. In a couple of the games, a faster graphics card would have given us higher frame rates. A lower detail setting would have given us higher frame rates. But I kept it to 1080p high detail in order basically to normalize it and make it easier to make a chart and talk about the same detail and resolution settings. Even though, let's be honest, League of Legends would run at 4K on this card. Frankly, most of these games at some detail level would run at 4K, and they would all run at 1440p on this card, on the CPU, maybe with a couple of adjustments to details to keep the frame rates up. But at least 60 frames per second at 1440p on all these games would have worked just fine. Like this video if you like it, share it with your friends if you loved it. Remember to subscribe to my channel with that big huge red button directly below. Hit the bell notification icon if you want to be notified of future videos. Otherwise, frankly, YouTube doesn't tell you when I publish new videos. Comments are in the comment section. Check the links in the video description. As I said before, all the links to all the videos on this computer are down there. Links to Amazon and Newegg for all the parts I used in there are down there. Those are affiliate links. They do support the channel when you shop. I would greatly appreciate it. Even if you decide to buy an i5 instead of an i3, use the link down there. Go over to Amazon or Newegg. buy the CPU you want. It does support, and I would greatly, greatly appreciate it. For future exclusive videos as well as early access videos, please consider subscribing for just $3 a month to Floatplane. No YouTube ads, higher quality video, direct support to the channel, and I would certainly greatly appreciate it if you're able. If you're not, that's fine. Please keep watching here on YouTube, and I will see you in the next video.